Kia ora and welcome. My name is Ellen Rose and this is the Creative Cure to Boredom. I've created this channel to share and explore some inventive approaches to art using everyday materials you can find in your own home. The hope is that it makes the current lockdown and isolation situation just a little bit more bearable. Today we're going to have a look at turning candles into carving and casting. So all you're going to need is some regular candles that you can buy in the supermarket or in the dollar store, and we're going to melt them down. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video and don't forget to leave your comments or suggestions below. Cheers! So I'm starting with the carving component of this artwork. So I've got a candle there that I've lit and I'm just using an old knife to cut into a white candle that I'm going to use as my clownfish at the center of this sculpture. So the flame heats the knife and that makes it a little bit easier to carve into the wax. I am finding this a lot more challenging than just using modeling wax or beeswax. It's a lot more brittle and it's also harder to cut into. It's certainly not as malleable as some of those other types of waxes. So you can just see that I'm trying to cut out a real basic form. I'm doing a sawing action to cut through some of the wax. I'm using the back of the blade, so the blunt side of the blade to sort of smooth over areas. And at times I'm trying to wedge the knife down to break off big sections. But I'm trying to be mindful not to break off too much because I know it's going to be difficult to add it back on with this type of wax. So when you're using modeling wax or beeswax, it's quite easy to re-stick that wax onto itself and to build up sections. With this wax, because it is more brittle, it's just flaking away as I'm putting the knife in it. And I did try to scoop some of the melted wax in the top of the candle to fill in the hole where the wick came out of in my fish. And it didn't work so well. It didn't want to stick to itself again. And I'm just trying to build up some definition between the fins at the bottom. I've tried to give the tail a bit of a curve on the end. And I'm just making sure that I've got the fins on the side as well. So I'm going around with the back of that blade and I'm just trying to smooth off all the areas and take off some of that black. And that black has come from the candle, from the heated wax on the metal. So I want it to look nice and clean, so I'm just removing all those black areas. But this wax that I'm taking off is going to be useful for the next component. I can use some of it to create some of our coral. So I've got a bowl full of ice and I've melted the rest of that green candle that I was using to heat the knife. And I'm just pouring it into a bowl of ice. And I haven't done this process before, so this is a bit of an experiment. And I was trying to gauge whether I needed to pour lots in certain areas or whether I could just do a little bit everywhere. Didn't want it to be too chunky, but I didn't want it to be too fragile. And as you see there, I have added a little bit more of the white candle to just strengthen up some of that coral-like texture that I'm hoping to get from there. So that was the light blue candle, and now I'll move on to the dark blue candle as my final candle. Once this sits for a little while, I'm going to pour some warm water in to melt the ice and then remove my chunks of coral. So this is the final result. You can see that it did come out quite effectively, pouring the wax into the ice cubes. You get some quite convincing sort of textures of coral there, which is really cool. Even when you can see quite clearly the sort of round ice cube shapes, it still somehow manages to look a little bit coral-esque. These little bits down the front were very fragile and did break apart, but I did manage to get two quite solid sections in that pour, which was great. It was a lot more fragile than I expected it to be, so it was quite brittle. It went very thin. I was expecting it to be a little bit more solid, so maybe pouring just in the one area repeatedly to try to build it up rather than pouring in multiple areas. Although you can see where it's pulled on the bottom of the bucket, it's actually made a really nice solid base. That's at the bottom there, that's touching the table. As for the little carved fish, I could certainly do a lot more detail and a lot more smoothing down, but you can see he's got quite a nice sort of swimming shape to him. I curved his tail a little bit to try to get a little bit of motion happening in him. But certainly if I was using modeling wax or even beeswax, I would be able to get a lot more detail in a lot quicker time because it's much more malleable. So using the paraffin wax, which is quite a hard wax, it's very brittle. So I would have to have added the detail very carefully, very slowly, and possibly with finer tools. Overall though, I think it did come out as a successful scene of a fish swimming. So I am going to declare from candles to carving and casting a success. I'd love to hear your thoughts or if you've had a similar experience with this sort of wax process. So please don't forget to leave your suggestions and comments below. My name is Ellen Rose and this has been the Creative Cure to Boredom. Till next time, ngā mihi nui.